Hi everybody, Jim here from Thumb Butte Distillery. Dana and the dog are running around here somewhere and they say hi too. We first would like to thank everybody for coming out last weekend and supporting us in our opening. A good time was had by all. Thank you to Deirdre for playing some real nice piano. Today we're really lucky to have Gail Steiger. He's going to play a few tunes for us. For those of you who don't know Gail, he's the real deal. Besides being a cowboy, he's a videographer who's been around the world, has lots of good stories about that, and he lives out with his wife Amy on the Spider Ranch where he's the foreman. 50,000 acres of a whole lot of nothing, and depends on how you're looking at it because it's one of the most beautiful places up here in, say, north middle Arizona. So welcome, thanks for listening, and here comes Gail.
Well, good afternoon, and a big thank you to Jim and Dana and the Thumb Butte Distillery for having me here this afternoon. I'm sure proud of these guys. I'm proud of the great whiskey that they're making down here, and proud of the fact just that they're doing it right here in town. We got a long tradition of whiskey making in this town. I'm going to start you off with a poem that my grandfather wrote. I'm named after my grandfather. His name was Gail Gardner. He got into the cow business back in 1914. And in those days, all you needed to call yourself a rancher was a registered brand and one cow to put it on. And everybody just ran all their cows in common on the public land. And his dad staked him to a little homestead kind of. If you go to Skull Valley, there's a bridge that runs across the road down there, and if you look off to the left, that little sub-irrigated bottom was where what he called his headquarters. But he and all of his friends just ran cows all over that country. And he wrote a lot of stories, songs, and poems about working out there. So I'm going to start you off with a poem that he wrote called The Moonshine Steer, in honor of the Thumb Butte Distillery. Two cowboys left their camp one day to lead in a bald-faced steer. And what befell them along the way, you're now a-going to hear. As they was a-riding through the brush, around the side of a hill, all at once they come upon a hidden moonshine still. The moonshiner heard 'em coming through the brush, and he thought that the sheriff had him sure, so he left there all in a rush. Says one old boy to the other old boy, "Now, this here's mighty queer. I wish that you would tell me the name of this contraption here." The coil was a gas line stole from a Ford. The still was a coal oil can, but out of the spout and into a jug, the old corn liquor ran. Them boys got down, and they hefted the jug, and they found her full, pretty nigh. They each took a snort right then and there, for they was tolerable dry. Says one old boy, "Let's go from here, for we've got work to do." So they got on their horses, and they rode away, and the jug, it went along too. When they got to the place where the steer was tied, they was a-feeling mighty gay, for they had stopped to tilt that jug most all along the way. Says one old boy, "That's the darndest steer that ever I did find. He's got 2 heads and a dozen legs and 14 tails behind." How they got that oxen loose from the tree, it'd be hard to tell, but when they went to lead him away, why, it seems that they just had hell. The steer bowed up and he sulled again, and they seen that he never would lead, so they figured that a jolt of moonshine was the very thing he'd need. They rolled old steer up on his back, and they held him by the horns, and down his sizzling goozle they poured a quart of corn. Says one old boy, "Let's get him up. We'll get him home real quick. He's bound to want him a chaser, and he'll go right straight to the crick." But the bald-faced steer, he pawed the ground, and he bawled and he bellered too. He walled his eyes and wrung his tail, and then he shook his hocks and flew. That oxen simply left the world, hard as he could go. And if he kept on drifting, he's down in Mexico. Now this story has a moral. and you'll find it here. If you ever have any moonshine, don't waste none on those deer. There you go. So that's kind of that was during the time of Prohibition, obviously, and obviously you can tell kind of what side of the question my granddad was on. He tried to make a living in the cow business right up into the 30s, and then the Depression hit, and he ended up moving to town and getting him a government job. I talked to my grandmother about the Depression. You know, that the folks, they kept the ranch. They just moved into town. They were still running some cows. And I asked Granny, how'd you make it in the Depression? And she said, oh, we did just fine. You know, we had our milk cow, and we had plenty of chickens, and we had all the meat we could eat, and we made it just fine. She said they couldn't get gas for the car, so they had to park the car. But aside from that, everything just went along about like it had. I'm going to play a song with you. It's a song that I sung for you. I just learned it recently. It's a song by a guy named Greg Jacobs. It's called A Little Rain Will Do, and I think it harkens back to the Depression too. There's powder dust on the section line road like flowers spilled at the kitchen floor. It ain't rained since early spring, over 130 days or more. That little pond at the foot of the hill, it was drier than a July wind. We loaded up the cows and we took them to town, brought nothing, took them home again. It was dry in 1930, dry in 32. Don't need a New Deal handout, a little rain will do. Well, my grandpa sat beneath the shade of a post oak, pulled out his watch and he looked at the sky. He wondered out loud, would it ever rain? Can't remember when it was this dry. And he looked at his wife and his dusty children, pondered the fate of a farming man. Make a crop and it ain't worth nothing. Next year the weather got him again. It was dry in 1930, dry in 32. Don't need a New Deal handout, a little rain will do. He told me once Hoover tried to starve them to death just because they were poor. They held on to one another. One another's all they had before. And he finally gave in and he swallowed his pride, made a mark for credit at the general store. Cost a penny a pound for cotton. Next year it cost 2 cents more. It was dry in 1930, dry in 32. Don't need a New Deal handout, a little rain will do. He told me once, you better stick to your business. Don't be a drinking and acting a fool. I spent the best years of my life looking at the backside of a mule. And he told me once, you better get you some schooling. Take a look at me and my calloused hands. Don't forget where you were raised. Keep it tied to the land. It was dry in 1930, dry in 32. Don't need a New Deal handout, a little rain will do. Don't need a New Deal handout, a little rain will do. Yeah, Greg Jacobs. I first heard Cody Canada singing that. So I know I have this in common with Dana. We've talked about this before, but one of my heroes is a guy named Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry, if you ever are interested in agriculture, Wendell Berry wrote a book called The Unsettling of America, and he talks about just kind of what happened when you take the culture out of agriculture. Long story short, when it comes to this neck of the woods, in 1934, the federal government passed the Taylor Grazing Act. The business model of my grandfather and his contemporaries was, if your cow, the one cow that you put the brand on, had a bull calf, you turned him into a steer and branded him, and then you turned him out, and you hoped to gather him again when he weighed like 11 or 1,200 pounds. That was your marketable product. And sometimes in those days, it'd take those steers, 3 or 4 years to get that heavy. If your cow had a heifer calf, you branded her, and you turned her out, and now you had 2 cows. And everybody kind of followed that business model. And so from the early teens into the 30s, all of a sudden this country was just loaded up with cattle. And they just pounded it to dust. You get too many cows on a piece of country, and pretty soon they don't look very good, and the country doesn't look very good either, and the government realized that they had to do something different. So the Taylor Grazing Act divided all this public land into individual allotments, and you had to bid on them, and then you could only run one brand on each allotment, and that was the beginning of the end for the little guys. Long story short, that was the start of a lot of government policies that ended up moving millions of small ranchers and small farmers off of their small ranches and small farms and out of their small towns into big cities, where the theory was that they could be more productively engaged in manufacturing or whatever jobs they could find there. Read Wendell Berry's book if you're interested in that. He says it a lot better than I could, but it's his fault that I wrote this song here. This is called Grandpa Had a Farm. Grandpa had a farm. He lived off the land. He grew his food up out of the ground, and his clothes were made by hand. He knew his neighbors well and their small community. They used to trade with each other for most of life's necessities. Then Uncle Sam moved us to town. He said we'd be happier there. We could make more money, we could buy more stuff. Prosperity beyond compare. He had some help from big industry. They showed us how to live right there on TV. Better get you some luxury. I guess it worked like they said it would. We don't slave in the fields no more. We trust Monsanto to grow our food, and we buy it at the store. Yeah, we all just specialize in a clicking and a clacking around. We buy our happy down at the mall. Ka-ching! That's a pretty sound. And if you make it to the top, man, this is a great country. But I do not see how we can be the land of the free, when we must look to some big company for everything we need. I do not see how we can be the land of the free. We must look to some big company for everything we need. Grandpa had a farm. He lived off the land, grew his food up out of the ground, and his clothes were made by hand. Now, there's a disclaimer involved. Those views are strictly mine and not necessarily the views of the management there. So any political statements that I make are mine alone, and certainly shouldn't reflect on the Thumb Butte Distillery's views. Since I'm telling family stories, I'm going to tell a story on my dad, or kind of on my dad. Dad was a politician. Like when I grew up, he served 5 terms in the House of Representatives from this district back there in D.C. So from the time I was 10 till the time I was 20, I kind of grew up, with getting a pretty good look at politics at that level. In 1976, Dad ran for the U.S. Senate. And if you'll remember, Governor Reagan at that time lost the primary to Gerald Ford. Now, this is Watergate and the 60s and Vietnam. We're kind of coming out of all of that, and we were kind of reeling. We were kind of staggering. Then the country seemed shell-shocked to me anyway. But this was a big race for him, and I was 20 years old, and I had dropped out of school so I could help him with this politicking. And after the primary, Governor Reagan was touring the country to stump for the faithful. And my job, he came to Phoenix, and my job was to shoot a television commercial with him. We had one of those newfangled teleprompters. And the plan was he was speaking in Sun City to a crowd over there, and I was supposed to go get this spot after the speech at Sun City. So me and 6,000 old people are there, and we're listening to the governor give his speech. And man, you talk about a speaker. That guy could get you on your feet. He was like, America is the greatest country in the world. We are a beacon of hope and freedom around the globe. Don't ever be ashamed of that. He had us all on our feet. I loved hearing that stuff. It was great. It was a really stirring speech. Long story short, we ran down there to get our TV spot, and we missed him. He'd left. So we chased him all over town, and we finally overhaul him. The chairman of the Arizona Republican Party at that time was a guy named Jack London. Jack was in the insurance business. And we got the governor over there at Jack's house. Jack was having a little private fundraising kind of get-together. And Jack introduced me to this guy named Mike Deaver, who later became President Reagan's deputy chief of staff. Mr. Deaver says, okay, go set your stuff up right over there in the den. I'll bring the governor in 10 minutes. You can have him for 5 minutes. So we hurry up and we set all our stuff up. And in comes the governor. We shake hands. He steps up. We got a little mark on the floor. He steps up and he looks into that camera. And he delivers the most perfect take you've ever heard. My dad's name was Sam, and you would swear that Ron and Sam had been just like that their whole lives. And Sam is the only thing standing between Arizona and total destruction, by the time the governor got done. And he does this in one take. And this little light kind of comes on for me. I was like, wow, that guy is a pro. This guy has spent his whole life reading whatever script they give him and making you believe. And then Mr. Deaver takes the governor by the arm and he goes, now this guy over here, this guy was, actually it was a guy named Carl Eller. Carl Eller, he created this little chain of stores right there called Circle K's. That was his thing. And this guy over here, he's the beer distributor. And this guy over here, he's the car distributor. Woo. So the light kind of came on for me right there. This is showbiz. Here's a good song for a pandemic. It's my favorite at the moment because it's the one I just learned. This was a song written by John Gorka. You can hear him sing it on an album that he did called The Company You Keep. And he does it a lot better than I do, but with apologies to John. Here is On the Morning Side. Am I a fool at this late date to heed a voice that says you can be great? I heard it young, now I hear it again. It says you can be better than you've ever been. I don't want to waste what I have to give and all of the time that I've left to live. Don't want to waste what I have to give and any of the time I've got left. I can do more than I thought I could. Work brings more luck and knocking on wood. There's random bad and random good. Work brings more good luck, good luck, good luck. You ask the world and the world says no. That's the world's refrain. Mine says go. You ask the world and the world says no. It's an old world refrain. Mine says go. I don't want to waste what I have to give and all of the time that I've left to live. Don't want to waste what I have to give and any of the time I've got left. I can do more than I thought I could. Work brings more luck and knocking on wood. There's random bad and random good. Work brings more good luck, good luck, good luck. I better be off. I got dreams to dream, though it seems uphill and a little extreme. If I can find hope in this fading light, then I'll find you on the morning side. If I can find hope in this fading light, then I'll find you on the morning side. I don't want to waste what I have to give and all of the time that I've left to live. Don't want to waste what I have to give and any of the time I've got left. I can do more than I thought I could. Work brings more luck and knocking on wood. There's random bad and random good. Work brings more good luck, good luck, good luck. If I can find hope in this fading light, then I'll find you on the morning side. Okay, back to the distillery. This is a Guy Clark song. It's called Hemingway's Whiskey. Hemingway's whiskey, warm and smooth and mean. Even when it burns, it'll always finish clean. He did not like it watered down. He took it straight up and neat. If it's bad enough for him, you know it's bad enough for me. Hemingway's whiskey. it's tough out there. A good muse is hard to find. Living one word to the next and living one line at a time. There's more to life than whiskey. There's more to words than rhyme. Sometimes nothing works. Sometimes nothing shines like Hemingway's whiskey. Sail away, 3 sheets to the wind. Live hard, die hard, this one's for him. Hemingway's whiskey. Hemingway's whiskey, warm and smooth and mean. Even when it burns, it'll always finish clean. He did not like it watered down. He took it straight up and neat. If it's bad enough for him, you know it's bad enough for me. Hemingway's whiskey. Guy Clark. Okay, this is an alternative for the Moonshine Steer. This is another one of my grandfather's songs. Those guys, the Sire Peaks is what they used to call the Sierra Prieta Mountains, of which Thumb Butte is the most prominent feature. My grandfather wrote this as a poem, but a friend of his named Billy Simone was a guitar player, and he talked him into singing it. He said, "Gail, that sounds like a song to me. It'd go over a lot better if you'd sing it instead of just reciting it." And they stole a tune. There was a tune called Polly Wolly Doodle All the Day. I don't know if I believe they stole that tune. And I think there was a guy named Bob Dennison, I think, wrote that. I'm not sure. Anyway, Sire Repeats by Gail Gardner. Way up high in the Sire Repeats, where the yeller pines grow tall, old Sandy Bob and Buster Jiggs had a roe deer camp last fall. Well, they taken their horses and running irons and maybe a dog or two, and they allowed they'd brand all the long-eared calves that came within their view. And any old doggy that flapped long ears and didn't bush up by day got his long ears whittled and his old hide sizzled in a most artistic way. Now one fine day, old Sandy Bob, he throwed his seagull down. He says, "I'm sick of the smell of burning hair, and I allows I'm a-going to town." So they saddles up and hits him a lope, for it weren't no sight of a ride. And them was the days when a buckaroo could oil up his insides. Well, they starts her in at the Kentucky bar at the head of Whiskey Row, and they winds up down by the depot house some 40 drinks below. They then sets up and turns around and goes her the other way. And to tell you the God-forsaken truth, them boys got stewed that day. Well, as they was a-riding back to camp, still packing a pretty good load, who should they meet but the devil himself, prancing down the road. Says he, "You ornery cowboy skunks, you'd better hunt your holes, for I've come up from Hell's Rim Rock to gather in your souls." Says Sandy Bob, "Oh, devil be damned, we boys is kind of tight, but you ain't a-gonna gather no cowboy souls without you has some kind of a fight." Then Sandy Bob punched a hole in his rope, and he swung it straight and true. He lapped it on to the devil's horns, and he stacked on his dallies too. Now Buster Jiggs was a Rieta man, with his gut line coiled up neat. He taken it down and built him a loop, and then he lashed the devil's hind feet. Well, they stretched him out and tailed him down, and while the irons was a-getting hot, they cropped and swallered, forked his ears, and then they branded him up a lot. They pruned him up with a dehorning saw, then they knotted his tail for a joke. They then rid off and left him there, neck to a blackjack oak. And if you're ever up high in the Sire repeats, and you hear one hell of a wail, you'll know it's that devil bellering around about them knots in his tail. Okay, I've tortured you about all I can.